First of all, thank you to Juliet and obviously to Naomi for inviting me today. And before I start, I also would like to mention that the learning should be in the merit of Eliyahu David ben Avraham Chaim, Eli K, and we send our deepest condolences to his parents, Avi and Deborah. And it's particularly a terrible tragedy for the whole United Synagogue because, of course, because Eli's grandparents, the rabbi in South Hampstead, Rabbi Shlomo and Rebbetzin Lindy Levine, and of course the uncle and aunts, Rabbi Baruch and Rebbetzin Kezi Levine of Bronsbury Park, and Rabbi Eli and Rebbetzin Lauren Levine, who also are South Hampstead. Well, we wish the entire family only good things, and that the learning should be in the merit of his soul. And also, I'd like to dedicate tonight learning to the recovery of my mother-in-law, who's actually in hospital at the moment with pneumonia, but she's in Israel, and so her name is Bruria Bas Chana. And what I'd like to speak about tonight is Chanuka and WonderWomen. And my mother-in-law was born on Chanuka, so her birthday's on the fourth night, and she is a Wonder Woman. And I'm telling you that I'm the daughter-in-law. She's the most incredible human being. So, we're going to start. The first thing you see on your sheets are some menorahs, some Chanukias, okay? I don't know if you can see it so clearly. I actually print it out much bigger if anybody really wants to look at it and finds it difficult to see very, very small. What can you see? Yeah? What can you see? Can you see it? If anyone can't see it small, there's two. Anybody want to have a look?
The lions.
Lions, yeah. The lady that cut the head of someone. Nice. Okay? Because most people, when you talk to them about Chanuka, they'll say something like Judah the Maccabee. And we'll talk about the Maccabees and the brothers, and there were lots of brothers, right? And we don't... I'll have the piece of paper back when everyone's had a chance to look at it. There is a lady, it's definitely a female figure, and she's holding something in her hand, and it's a knife. So for people who are interested, I don't know if people know how to use QR codes, but if you take your phone and you try and take a picture of that little weird-looking blackish box with little white things, it will come up with the web page, and you can have a look, because these two menorahs are actually inside the Jewish Museum in New York. One is 19th century, it's Italian, and the other one is from the 18th century, from Poland. I'm not really talking so much significance, I just thought it was very interesting that, and there are loads of other menorahs. I even think there's one of the V&A, which is from about 1800, a picture of a menorah. So if you just Google, you could do it after. You could do it after. Okay, it's worse than school. Seriously. Okay. So Yehuda HaMaccabee is known as the main character, but there are women who are famous. Where's my piece of paper? I have it back. Get nervous about my paper. Have it back. Sorry. Anyway, I'm getting distracted with my paper. There are women who are very famous from the Chanuka story, but there are stories about them, but they're sort of much less well known. And I apologise in advance because the stories are not happy stories, and Juliet said it has to be happy. So it will be happy, and you'll bear with me, it's happy, okay? So what happens? What is the Chanuka story? What's the Chanuka story about? There was the Greek occupation. We don't exactly know when the story of Chanuka happened. They oppressed the Israelites, the Jews, and they were forbidden to learn the Torah, to keep Shabbat, and to sanctify the new month. They didn't have Rosh Chodesh, and they didn't have circumcision. They really tried to stop people keeping Torah and the mitzvahs. And I heard somebody tell me that during the 8 days of Chanuka, which is significant because a baby boy is supposed to have his Brit Milah on the 8th day, we always have Rosh Chodesh because it's the 25th of Kislev and we go into Teves. We always have Rosh Chodesh. There's 8 days. We always have a Shabbos. And the significance of 8 days being number of days of a bris milah, during Chanuka, the number 8's in our head, 8 days, and there's always Rosh Chodesh and there's always a Shabbos. So the 3 things that the Greeks try to eradicate from our lives, we actually have on Chanuka, which is a bit weird. Now, Chanuka is hardly mentioned. There's a few little tangential references in the Torah, but I won't go through them. They're all very, very minor hints. For example, like the 25th place where the Jews camped in the desert was a place called Hashmona. Doesn't know obvious hints. And even the Talmud, the Gemara, hardly even mentions Hanukkah. It's like tangential. On page 23 of the Gemara of Shabbos, around that area, very small section, just talking about candles. And whilst we're talking about candles, let's just sort of mention Hanukkah. It's like hardly even mentioned. So how do we know about Hanukkah? So obviously, traditions were passed down, father to son, mother to daughter, teacher to student. But there are 2 books that are not part of the canon, not part of the Tanakh, not part of the 24 books. They are outside books. They're called the Apocrypha for people who want to look up more information about it. And the Apocrypha is a Latin, Greek word, means hidden or covered, mysterious. And so other religions hold these books more precious, and there's 2 books of the Maccabees and 1 book called the Book of Judith. I don't know enough about Apocrypha to be able to talk about it, but they are written maybe not originally in Hebrew, or maybe they were written in Hebrew and they were translated to Greek. There was that very famous translation of the Torah by 70 wise men called the Septuagint, the 70 men, and they translated things. We do have very old versions, but they're in Greek, and we don't know whether they're originally in Hebrew. That's just a little side point. You don't need to worry about it. I just think it would be intellectually dishonest if I didn't mention that before we got going. And in the book of Maccabees, which is not considered part of our holy sacred texts, but we do know the story, and we do go with the story of Judah the Maccabee and his father Matisyahu and the grandfather Yochanan, the high priest, and we mention all their names. Maybe the story is, I don't assume that the story is factually correct, but there are things that we hold and it's part of the storyline that we believe in. It's the scholars differ as to when the actual date of Hanukkah is. It's like a bit of a disagreement. It's not exactly known exactly when it is.
Story, and the Greek Flavius, didn't he?
Yeah, so Josephus also speaks about the Maccabees and brings...
Is that like corroborated?
It's not exact. Nothing is exact. I can't say that I've read the whole of Josephus,
No.
but I did read that Josephus Flavius, he did write some things down, and it's not exactly corroborated. But as far as Jewish texts are concerned, they're less worried about the historical accuracy. Let's say, for example, talking about Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, we hear things about their life and there's so much missed out. And then you go into tiny details about something tiny, and then, that he had camels and she-donkeys and he-donkeys, and you mention that, and then we don't know where he was born and what happened for the first 75 years of his life. We just don't know anything about that. So the Torah is not a history book. It's for something for us to learn something from it. So no one ever said it should be historically accurate. And even the Torah itself isn't always in chronological time order. Another speech for another time. Let's not digress. Okay, so in the book of Maccabees, we have Matisyahu, who is the high priest. And he tries to defend the Jews against a Greek, or perhaps Greek Syrian. They're called Yevonim, which is Greek, but maybe Syrian. We don't exactly know, can't exactly match up all the people. And there's some sort of Greek authority who tries to get them to sacrifice to pagan gods. And he's like, I'm not doing that. And he stands up and they start a revolution. And that's how the story of Hanukkah starts. And then there's a big fight, the mighty against the few, and a small Jewish army band, the Maccabees, which is an acronym for Mi Chamocha Ba'elim Hashem, Mem Kaf Bet Yud, Maccabi, Mi M Ka. Okay, if people don't get what I'm saying. So am I doing a primary school thing now? I'm like, sorry, okay, Maccabees. The Maccabee is actually an acronym. And so then they find this tiny flask of oil, and then they light it, and the menorah. It's all very, very exciting. But we only hear about it in the Talmud tangential to the candles. And so if you look at source 1 on your sheet, this is Juliet chose the topic about women. So, okay, well, you said. Talk about a joint group decision. Doesn't matter. Okay, so, Noshim chayovos b'nei Chanuka sha'af hein hoyu ba'osa hanes. Women are obligated to light the Chanuka candles because they were also included in the miracle. It's very interesting because women have got generally can have an exemption from keeping a lot of the mitzvot. Let's say we don't have to wear tzitzis or go to shul 3 times a day because it's a positive time-bound mitzvah. But Chanukah in particular, and there are other ones, Chanukah in particular, we're told the women are in the miracle, and I don't want you to take anything I say as halachic guidance. I'm going to mention some laws and customs, but I'm not, do your own thing. I'm not telling you should or shouldn't light candles. Do whatever you like, whatever your custom is. A lot of people want to have in their household custom is to have one candelabra burning, and other people are like, each person has to do their own one. Everyone's got their own thing. I'm definitely not a halachic expert. So why are the women obligated? Because they are somehow connected to this miracle. So why are they connected to this miracle, and what is the connection to women and the miracle? So I'm going to tell you 3 stories today about women and how they connect to the miracle. They're not such lovely stories, but I want to get a positive message out of the stories. Okay, so the first one, source 2. Now this is Rashi, who is Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki, who passed away in 1105. He lived in Troyes in France. I'm still source 2 on your sheet. And he says, the reason why women are obligated in the mitzvah of Chanukah lights is because the Greek Assyrians decreed that virgins were forced to have relations first with a Greek ruler before they got married. And it was because this became abolished, there was a miracle happened, that the people revolted against this, and they managed to get this decree averted. The women were saved, so to speak, and therefore they should be included in the miracle. They should be part of the mitzvah because they themselves were affected, so to speak, almost directly affected, even though clearly the whole community was affected. There is this sort of horrible, barbaric behaviour is, pardon my French, even though I am French, droit du Seigneur, okay, or also known as us, now I'm really not good at Latin, us prime noctis. Anyone wants to look? Oh, you look like you know what I'm talking about.
Prime noctis is first night.
That's right. So apparently, they had this idea that the local commander, he was like, anyone who was about to get married, he would basically rape her, and he wanted to have the first night in it. So anyone who wants to get married, so people were reluctant to get married, and if people don't get married, can't have children. If let's not go there, okay? I'll retract that. Okay, so people didn't want to get married and have children if they knew that they were going to have to suffer this indignity. So we have the story of the First Lady. Now, the names are not mentioned. It's very ambiguous. Some people call the lady Hannah, maybe yes, maybe no. Some people say this lady's identified as the daughter of Matisyahu. And whoever this lady was, she took a stand and she said, I am not doing this. And according to one of the legends that we have, at her wedding feast, the daughter of Matisyahu stood up and tore her dress at her wedding, or just before her wedding. And she exposed herself to her family and her guests. And her brothers were like, what are you doing? And she said, what are you worried about me exposing myself in front of you, my clothing, and I'm taking off my clothing? Tonight I'm going to be raped by the commander. And where are you? Look at the story of what happened in the Torah to Dinah when she was abused and assaulted by Shechem. I don't know if people are familiar with that story. And her brothers went in and they basically killed the whole city. I'm not saying that I think that's right, I'm not judging, I'm not talking about it, but she basically said, where were you? Where were you to defend me? I'm going to have to take a stand, and I'm going to have to take a stand myself. And she said, 2 brothers of Dinah saved her. I've got 5 brothers. Where are you? And that night, the 5 brothers, she dressed up in her finery. She pretended she was going to go along with the prime noctis with the commander, and her brothers came in and killed him. That is the first story, which I said she's not such a nice story, but it's like exciting that this could have been the start of the revolution as well, because once the commander got killed, caused problems. But think about it, how for us, it's in our very recent past that people have got up and stood up and said, I've been attacked, even the whole Me Too movement. And even before that, and even if you think about any terrible, terrible stories of assault, how women are almost like the victim is like, oh, it's because she wore that dress or some rubbish like that, which is totally and utterly unacceptable. And here we have this story, it's an ancient legend, where it's like, we don't really know what her name was. Either she was, or I'm not sure, but there's different versions of the story. And that's one of the stories. But I think it's quite heroic to think that a lot of the times, and I'm not sure if people even are aware of this story, is that they Judah the Maccabee, they fought the army and they were brave, but there are 3 women, even though we don't exactly know their identity, and the stories are a little bit hidden. And obviously you don't get taught these stories in school. I think it's quite remarkable that someone had the strength of character to stand up and basically say, I'm not going through with this, but it must have been very harrowing for the community at the time.
Are they definitely different women, or are they the same ones?
We think, we don't know, because there's different legends written in different places, and they're very obscure, and there isn't an original source. People refer back to it, so we might have lost the original source, and there are different, I'll tell you when it comes to the next one, there's 3 different names for the person, so we don't know if the story actually happened, or maybe the story did happen, but we don't know who the person it happened to. We don't know. I think it's not so important. Obviously, I'd love to know, and there's lots of things I'd love to know, but I think that the point of the stories are to teach us that there were people who were willing to take a stand. And you have to understand, if you think about the Taliban and women's rights, that must have been the world, 500, 1,000 years ago. It's not the emancipation that we have. Think about the suffrage movement. That's really recent. It's and then this person stood up. So I think it's not about the exact details of the story. I think it's about that it's even recorded that there's even a legend that someone stood up. I think that she is a legend, if you know what I'm saying when you say someone's a real legend. Anyway, so we have the cause for additional celebrations on Hanukkah, specifically women, obviously donuts, oily foods, but did you know that there's also an idea that we're supposed to eat milky foods? Did you know that? I didn't know that until I did this research. Okay, apparently you're supposed to eat milky foods, so cheesecake, here we come. Cheesecake donuts. Source 3. Okay, it's customary to increase meals on Hanukkah, especially the women, for a miracle was performed through the hands of women. Now, I don't know whether increased meals is actually a good thing for us. First of all, everyone's on a diet, right? But increased meals means we just have to make the meals usually. But although there's like a bit more like equality, and I like seeing, my lovely son-in-laws all making meals and everything. But there is an idea that we're supposed to have increased meals. Where is this idea of cheese? Where did I get it from? So for that, we're going to look at, I think we look at source 5. I know it says source 4 because source 4 was very short, so it had to go on the end of the page, and then I couldn't change the auto numbering. So source 5. This is the Shulchan Aruch, which is the codex of Jewish laws, and it says the following, source 5. The additional meals which we add on these days are voluntary. So you don't have to have extra meals. And by the way, I noticed you've also got milk there, so there you go. You're like right in the theme, donuts and milk, fantastic. But since the sages did not establish these days of Chanuka as feasting and joy, so for example on Pesach and Sukkot, we have proper, fully fledged festivals. Well, Chanukah's a little bit more of a, a bit of like a half festival. We don't have to. I'll read it because I don't want to say the wrong thing. But some say there's somewhat of a mitzvah. It's like a positive obligation to add extra food, to eat extra food, and that's according to Rabbi Avram Kara of Prague, because the dedication of the temple took place at that time. It's a custom to recite hymns and songs of praise during the additional meals, and then you could turn your additional meal into a mitzvah meal, which is known in Hebrew as a su'udat mitzvah. So, for example, if a person has a bar mitzvah, it's called a sudas mitzvah or a sudat mitzvah. Or if someone has a wedding where we wash and we bench, we make it into a religious excuse. Well, I don't want to say religious excuse, but we have like a lovely meal. Some say, this is written in the Shulchan Aruch, some say cheese should be eaten during Chanukah because a miracle was done through milk which Yehudis fed the enemy. And that is quoting a rabbi called Rabbi Nissim of Gerona, who lived around 1370, around that time, and he lived in Gerona. And this is what Rabbi Nissim says, a source 4. You have to turn back to page 1, sorry. I hate cutting sources in half. So he is referring to what I was alluding to at the beginning. There's a book of part of the Apocrypha, like an outside book, it's not part of Tanakh, called the Book of Judith. And Judith was the daughter of Yochanan Kohen Gadol, the aunt of Judah Maccabee, and she was especially beautiful. And one of the tyrant rulers desired her. So he was like, let's spend the night together. And she's like, no, I don't want to. And then he's like, let's go out to the cinema together. And she said, no, I don't want to. And et cetera, et cetera. And then she thought, you know what I'm going to do? I am going to do this. And I'm going to pluck up the courage. And I'm going to give him to eat. And I'm going to give him to drink. And when he's drunk, I'm going to chop off his head. Mm-hmm. Sorry, Juliet, because you said you wanted it to be fun. So I don't know if it's fun, but okay. And that is the story. That is the story of Yehudis. So if you want to read more about her when we're finished, on the last page there's 2 more QR codes. Yehudis, Judith. That's one QR code. You can look at it. I gave you. It's like something written by the United Synagogue. And another one about Hannah and her 7 sons, which we're going to come to later. So this lady showed tremendous bravery because she was taken by the governor. His name was Holofernes. And you're looking like, oh yeah, I know that. Yeah, okay. Yeah, sort of like, yeah. And she killed him, took his head on a spear, wrapped it up in a little basket, and then she came to the town where she lived, which was called Betulia, and she put his head on a spear, and then everyone was like, oh my goodness me. Then they attacked the army, and then they won, and it was all fantastic. But tremendous, tremendous courage for that lady.
And these are like spin-off Hanukkah stories, are they? Like, I'm so sorry, it's so interesting. I just want to so they're kind of the same time.
Because the thing is, nobody actually knows 100% when the Hanukkah story is sourced. But that's right. So we say it's around the time of the Greek-Syrian time, and we see that for example, the Shulchan Aruch, it's part of our traditional heritage because maybe we've lost the books and we don't exactly know what the traditions were, but we can see the Shulchan Aruch is like the 1500s. The Rav Yosef Cairo who wrote the Shulchan Aruch, and we know he's saying, look, this happened. He actually says which Yehudis fed milk to the enemy. So it's a story, and then we don't know what the story is. Then we look at the Book of Judith, and we see the story. So that we do have the story. It's part of our tradition, but it's a bit weird because the Book of Judith isn't part of our canon, isn't part of the Tanakh. Any questions? I'll just stop if anybody wants to ask me something, or you like blood and guts, yeah? 2 stories, yeah?
Do you know why the Book of Judith is not part of the Tanakh? Is a decision maybe made by the people.
Okay.
It's
a very, very difficult question. And I tell you what, get Rabbi Lou to give you a class on that. No, seriously, it's a very, very complicated thing. And we say that perhaps the 24 books, the rabbis decided which books went in and which books didn't go in. So, for example, Shir HaShirim is a love song. It's a love poem. And it's very sensual and very strange that should be part of Tanakh. But that was included. But the Book of the Maccabees is not included. But it's like a completely another whole topic of why Chanuka has to be out of the books. Okay, you have to invite me back next year if you want to hear that one. No, seriously, it's like a very big topic because Chanuka is very closely linked to the oral tradition and not the written tradition. It's about the rabbis, and it's supposed to be after the temple period. It's post-temple period, and also there's no documentation to understand what got included in the canon and what didn't include the canon. But I did read somewhere that the Book of Judith is not originally, that they didn't find it originally in Hebrew, so maybe it's originally in Greek. Side issue, by the way, a Greek Torah, ancient Greek Torah would be kosher. It would be a kosher Torah. Very interesting. Another whole topic. Just make you interesting things. Okay, so apart from donuts and milk and cheese, we light the candles on Chanuka. So source 6. And we say the song Haneros Halalu. Where's Naomi? Right. Haneros Halalu, right? Haneros Halalu Kodesh Heim. These candles are holy. Ve'ein lanu reshus lehishtamesh bahem. And we have got no permission. We are not allowed to use them in any way. Ella lil rosam bilvad. Only to see them. And because of that, we are, look at source customs and laws, 7, Rashi says, this is on the Gemara and Shabbos, you're not allowed to make use of the light. We have to, when we light the Chanuka candles, if, let's say, for example, you're lighting it over there, and we should light it at the front of the house if possible, but you should leave the lights on in the room where you're lighting the candles. And that's why, another reason why we have a shamash, you shouldn't use the candles themselves to light each other. And also that way the shamash is a light that isn't part of the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 candles, but you shouldn't use the lights. We say Hallel and we say Al HaNissim, which is source 8. They made them days of a festival, and we recite Hallel, the whole of Hallel, which is unusual. But it's not forbidden, source 8, to work on the days of Hanukkah. But they were fixed only in regards to saying Hallel and Al HaNissim as part of thanking God. And then for source 9, this is the Maharil, who passed away in 1427, and he wrote Customs of German Jews, and he says, it is a received tradition in our hands that a person should not work, and I've put it in inverted commas, when the candles, one second, where am I? When the candles are lit on Hanukkah. There are those who say, I didn't know this, that additionally on the first and last day of Hanukkah, the custom of our rabbis was to forbid work. What does work mean? I suppose it means to do with Shabbat, that people shouldn't do things. But I've never heard someone say, don't drive your car, don't write, I think it means don't get engrossed in another activity. So
basically watch the candles for that first half an hour.
I'm not sure that you actually have to light the candles. Watch the candles for half an hour, but we're supposed to light candles as soon as possible, if possible. So we start, it will be this week on Sunday night, around 5 o'clock, at the time that Shabbat goes out. But what we're supposed to do is, you're not supposed to sit down and have dinner just before, because then you might get busy with dinner and forget the candle lighting time. You shouldn't start a whole new project. But this business of women, I'll tell you in a minute, okay? I don't want to get ahead of myself, okay? So just try not to start a meal before you light candles, and try and start lighting candles as early as you can. 10. This is also the Shulchan Aruch. On the 25th of Kislev starts 8 days of Hanukkah. One is forbidden to give a eulogy or to fast, but one is permitted to work. The women have a custom not to work while the candles are burning. Now, I hate that because it's like whenever that half an hour is, you just want to empty the dishwasher or you just want to empty the washing machine, right? And it's like, I'm like, gotta do that. And that's almost like causes more stress than being told that you're not allowed to work. But maybe it's supposed to be a holiday for the women. I brought this for you because I want to show you that it specifically mentions the woman. And in Hebrew, I'll read it. V'nohagos hanoshim shelo la'asos melacha ba'od shehaneros dolkos. That the women should not do any work for the time the candles are lit. You only have to wait half an hour even if the candles last longer. And this is my best sentence. V'yesh mi she'omar she'ein lahakel lohem. And there is an opinion that says we shouldn't be lenient. You're not allowed to let the women work. And I'm thinking this is brilliant, but we have to make extra meals. So I'm like, I don't know how that works. But anyway, but it's just amazing because it's like the rabbis somehow are sorry.
Can we have that rule every Friday, please?
You can have that rule every Friday, but I can guarantee you if you don't do it on Friday, nothing will happen. And then even if you decide you're not going to do it, there'll be so much to clear up after.
What it should say is that the women shouldn't work and the men should do it instead.
Doesn't say that.
That it does not
Doesn't say that, but I love the one which says, and there's an opinion which we shouldn't be lenient. Don't let women do any work, only for that half an hour. The rest of the year is fine.
You can sit and look at it. So basically, get a cup of tea, sit by your candles for half an hour, relax.
Yeah, okay, as you say, that's not exactly how it works. That's where the idea maybe perhaps why they play dreidel games, because it's supposed to be like, don't do anything.
Going here with one area highlighted and then left out.
I should have made I'm really going to be good at keeping this law, right? I'm like keeping it. I know, but I always think that half an hour might be great, but then you'll pay back, and you'll have to prepare in advance, and you'll have to pay back after that half an hour's over. Again, lovely that we've got 30 minutes rest whilst the candles are going.
While they're lit, because they don't last long.
I know, but it depends. Some people oil. But I think it's only, by the way, even once what's her name again? She's being extra stringent and she's getting 5-hour candles. She's like from 10 till 5.
Hour and a half is long enough.
The problem is, but you only have to wait half an hour. It doesn't matter. You can after that you can do it. Okay, so great, lovely to have this extra rest. But extra meals, the idea that we're supposed to have extra meals and the extra milky and the donuts and the latkes, that's so much work. But it's got something to do with the miracle. So why is it we're not allowed to use the candles? Why is it we have to not work when the candles are on? So source 11, this is the Beit Yosef, this is Rav Yosef Cairo's big work, which he condensed into the Shulchan Aruch afterwards. He says their rationale, the reason why women shouldn't do any work, is a reminder, which should be a reminder that we mustn't use the Chanuka candles. You shouldn't perhaps, let's say, do sewing by the light of the candles or whatever people do by the light of the candles. Because don't forget, in antiquity, people didn't have electric lights, so maybe people might get tempted to do something when the candles were lit. So we shouldn't use the candles for anything, and we shouldn't do work for the half an hour whilst the candles are lit. So number 12, this is the Mishnah Brura, which is the Chofetz Chaim. He says, you mustn't do anything for half an hour. This is the source for half an hour. So you could pretend it's an hour and a half. I could give you an editable version. You could have that, okay? So, and then we have another rabbi whose name is David Shlomo Eibshitz, who lived in the Ukraine. And 1755 he died, something like that. And he says, you should not do anything for that half an hour because you shouldn't get distracted, and you should use that time to remember the miracle, and specifically women, because women had a specific miracle in the form of what happened to the woman who was saved from her wedding night disaster, and the other woman who killed the Greek general. And then we have another rabbi who says specifically the women, because the miracle took place through their hands. And I've already given you 2 stories, but there is a third story. So I've told you first about the daughter, maybe her name was Hannah, the daughter of Matisyahu, and Judith and Holofernes. And there is another woman. And again, there are different versions of these events. There are versions in the Midrash. There's even one in the Talmud. And anyone who wants to have the original sources, I can give them to you. She's either known as Hannah, and I think she'll be the most famous one, Miriam, who maybe her name was Miriam but Tanchum, or perhaps even in outside Jewish sources as someone called Solomenia. I think I'm pronouncing it correctly. And the story is actually told in the Gemara in Gittin, and also in one of the Midrashim, which is called Pesikta Rabasi. So anybody who wants to look it up, I can send you all the sources. And the story goes as follows. And with your permission, I'm going to read it, unless somebody else would like to read it. 1 second. Oh, no, I won't read it. I'll just say it because I'll read the last part. So they think this story happened around the time of Antiochus Epiphanes, and this story perhaps is more familiar to you, known as the story of Hannah and her 7 sons. So it may or may not be that this person's name was Hannah, but it was a woman who had 7 boys, and the Greek or Assyrian ruler tried to force her children to either eat or touch pig meat, whatever it is. The story's told different versions of the story, basically do something against what they wanted to do. When they refused, he tortured and killed her sons one by one. And I put a little picture on the last page of like a famous painting of Hannah and her 7 sons. It's from 1863, and I think they might have got cut off at the end. It's called The Marston of the 7 Maccabees. We're not sure these people were the Maccabees, I'm not sure, but that's what the person who painted the painting And so this story is told also in the book of Maccabees, in the 2nd book of Maccabees, but I'm just going to find the last bit that I wanted to read to you, which is from that's my page. Okay, yeah. So one by one, this woman, her sons gave up their lives because they weren't willing to do whatever he wanted. By the way, as a side issue, there are only 3 things that a person should give up their life for, and one is idolatry, one is immorality, and one is murder. So if someone puts a gun to your head and says, take this gun and kill someone else, in theory you should say, I'll do that. But I don't think, there are lots of things that people have died for, but perhaps they didn't need to, but that was their decision. But that's not what the Torah doesn't ask for that. So this woman, and the story is told in the book of Maccabees, which is source 15. Sorry I didn't put the vowels in. I spent ages putting all the vowels in everywhere. Difficult to find things with vowels. And she says to her last son as he's about to die. So 6 sons have died in front of her face. And she still doesn't want her youngest son to die. And she says, my son, have pity on me. I carried you 9 months in my womb, and I suckled you 3 years. I fed you. I'm assuming that means breastfed, according to Hebrew. And I've reared you to an age that you are now, and they say he's still quite young. And show me mercy this time. I implore you, my child, look at the earth and the sky and everything in them, and now consider how God made them from nothing, and human beings come into being in the same way from nothing. Therefore, my son, do not fear this executioner, or this person who's going to murder you. And like your brothers, accept death, so that God will return you back to him at a time of mercy. And that's just the most heartbreaking.
I was just going to say, so do whatever they want.
She didn't say that. And then in the Gemara and Gittin, the story in Hebrew, and I'll read a little bit in Hebrew, she says, Omru lo bonai lechu ve'imru la Avraham avichem. She says, I'll just say one sentence before. When the last son, who was younger, they say he was under 10, the emperor felt so mercy on this woman, and she said, you know what, let's say he wanted him to bow down to something. So the emperor said, listen, what we're going to do is I'm going to take my ring and I'm going to drop it on the floor, and he could just pick up my ring, and that way it won't look like he's bowing down to the statue or bowing down to me, but he's just picking up my ring, so that way I'll save face and then your son will survive. And she's like, no, that's not happening. She goes, can I just have a little quick chat with my son? And she whispers in her ears, according to the ideas that we have in the Maccabees, basically, your other brothers have died, you're never going to do this, stay strong, I'm going to be fine, stay strong. And she says afterwards, Omro lo banai lechu ve'imru la Avram avichem. And she says, it's not on your sheet, how ridiculous that the emperor has to have a charade and to save face in front of my son, and my 6 sons have given up their life, and he can't cope with the fact that someone's not bowing down to him. And she says, when you get to heaven, she says to her son, go and tell Abraham, Abraham, your father, you sacrificed and you didn't even sacrifice one son. You were asked to give up the life of one son, Abraham, going to take Yitzchak to the Akedah. And she says, Va'ani akadati shiva mizbachos, and 7 of my children actually, that was the reality, died in front of me. Afhi al salagag, and she got up and she went up on a roof, v'nofla v'mesa, and she died. She fell and she died. A heavenly voice came out and said, Aim habanim smecha, which is part of Hallel. I find this so tragic. But I find it incredible to think that a person was so strong-willed that at their time they really held up what they believed was right, and I want to come out of this with a positive message, even though these 3 stories are rather horrific. And great women are in the miracle, but people don't even know the stories. These stories are part of our tradition. These women were, in some ways, they teach us bravery. And even though all of the stories are about tremendous devastation, it teaches us that there were these women who stood up and had the courage to act on their conviction and to stand up for what they believed in. Today, Jewish people and Jewish women we've got things that are coming our way. I don't want to say attacks, but difficulties and challenges. The community is facing challenges from within and without. And the whole Jewish community, and because we're talking to a group of women and specifically about women, we are almost on a proverbial battlefield. Whatever that is, there are some women who would like to have more rights in shuls, or, equal rights, say, for suffrage, which is not so long ago. And we need to have these courageous role models. We need to have those courageous role models. And I'm sure that a lot of women have been courageous role models, but being that I have got 7 girls, I think very much about the fact that, I don't know who here has got children, or, but you are all daughters. You need to think of people, and you need to find ways where we can, through the story of Chanuka, inspire ourselves and motivate ourselves and the next generation to find the courage to stand up for what they need. We need, one of my daughters is a dentist. I don't know if I want to say this, she might get upset with me, but anyway. And she says she sometimes sits on the train and then she's like someone wolf whistles and she can't bear it. She actually says, I'm a dentist. I don't deserve to be treated as a fairy. She doesn't want to be treated like a doll, a Barbie doll. And being that I'm the mum, and I've only got sisters, and my mum only had sisters, my grandma only had sisters, but I feel that we have to be strong, we have to be courageous role models. And the story of Chanuka teaches us a lot about courage and a lot about a girl power, a lot about WonderWomen. So I did say it was going to be about WonderWomen and Wicks. I just want to stop there if anybody wants to say anything, and then I'll just share another idea with you.
I think it's a shame that they don't make this more highlighted in schools.
I know, but because of the story in terms of... No, it's not even gory. How do you explain to kids about, a gun?
Women, yeah. Even in the Pesach story, I recently had the data from the PJ library or something, and there's a whole part about putting a course for Miriam, which I never knew about it till I'm an adult. So if it's a thing, then it's a shame that it's not highlighted more. Like, the girls are never in the stories. They always...
There are lots of women in stories.
I mean, Bereshit is full of gory stories and murder and story
And
of
rape,
Noah
And rape, yeah, of course, yeah, but you missed that chapter out.
And
We miss out.
there was
They
a
do miss
Melissa
it out,
boy,
they do miss it
he had his parsha a few weeks ago, and it was like a litany of like the most awful things. Like, it was awful.
Well, this week's Sedra as Tamar
And
and
I
Yehuda.
thought this sweet little voice was singing about these awful things that were happening, and I thought it was just such a.
What about Acharei Mos, all the forbidden relationships, like do not lie with your father's sister?
There are some stories that we used to telling, and perhaps it's just that we're just used to
I
telling.
think it is a generational thing, though. I mean, I remember the story of Tamar, my mother saying to me in Shul, she was no better than she should be, and that's completely wrong. But that's what she learned, that was what she learned at Cheder, if you like.
Wow.
It's not what we learn now.
I think Tamar's now seen as a heroine, actually.
Absolutely.
No.
But that's the ancient text and the ancient
Basically,
commentators.
you need someone to spin it better.
Even the ones that are
For
more known,
women.
like Yael, like people they're not told so much.
So this idea of this story of Judith is almost like not a copycat. It's very similar. So there is an idea that we're sort of evoking the biblical stories,
Right.
or that say, and the Aim Habarim Smecha is supposed to refer to, that's why maybe this woman is known as Chana, because she's known as someone who had no children, and then she was the mother of children, and we refer that path to Hilim to her.
That's nice, they all invoke each other. And
No, but there's definitely like copying stories, or like sister stories, we'll call it like that.
Secondary school they could teach it, not primary school, but secondary school.
Definitely, definitely.
Exactly, there is so much.
Right, so if any of you are teaching in secondary school, get it out there, okay?
I mean, I'm an adult now with kids, and I need to.
Okay,
I've never heard
so-
about it.
Okay, so then that's really great. I'm so happy that you learned something new. Okay, so I just want to finish off with one of the last things. I just want to share another idea with you. Did you want to say something? Sorry,
Esther.
Esther.
Yeah, that's one of the ones that we
Heroine,
Yeah.
and we know about her.
Ruth is a heroine, isn't she?
There are Deborah.
Yeah. Yeah, there are. Yeah, there are.
they all covered somewhere.
So another place which is hinted about Hanukkah in the Torah is about when Aaron, the high priest, gets told about lighting the menorah in the temple. And in fact, it's Source 16 on your sheet. It's actually in chapter 8 of Bamidbar. So 8 is significant because it's 8 days of Hanukkah. It's the 36th parsha, if I'm not mistaken. So it's like 36 candles we light minus the 8 of the shamash. So it's 36 and 8. And it talks about the menorah. And it's in Parshas Bahaloscha. And it's chapter 8, verse 2 of Bamidbar. It comes after the temple is dedicated, and all the princes offer up their sacrifices, and Aaron's like almost a bit like upset, and then he gets this lighting the candles, and it says Bahaloscha es haneros el mul pnei hamenorah yo'iru shivas haneros. In the temple, there's this very strange word. When you make the lights light up, with the word al, like aliyah or like el al on, when you make the lights light up opposite the face of the menorah, the lamp, the candelabra, you should light 7 lights. This is talking about the temple service, the Bet HaMikdash. And Rashi says, what is this strange word, bahaloscha, when you bring it up? And he says, because when a flame rises upwards, it's an expression of ascending, like going up, implying that you have to kindle the lights, and you actually have to light this when you light the Chanuka candles. You can't just sort of like half light it and hope for the best. You actually have to make it go up and go up by itself. And I think that Chanuka in Hebrew means it's the festival, which we have the idea it's Chanu. They rested on Kaf Hey, the last 2 letters of the word Chanuka. Chanu Ka Ha is 25th. They rested. The Maccabees rested on the 25th day. But the word, isn't it interesting that a lot of the schools are called Hasmonean, Menorah, they're all Maccabees. Those words are used in education. Why? Because the word in Hebrew for education is chinuch, which is the same word as Chanuka, chinuch. Can you hear it? And we have an obligation to educate ourselves and educate those around us, and to make sure that anybody who is in our circle of influence, that anything that we can do to help them, that we don't just sort of like touch and like just quickly move past. We actually try and make sure that it's like up and the candle and the lights are lit up. And also in the temple, we also were asked, Moshe was told to make himself silver trumpets. If you look at it, it's in Bamidbar, it's in chapter 10, verse 2. Make yourself silver trumpets. And the question is asked, why did he have to make himself silver trumpets? Okay, and for the temple service. And the rabbis tell us is because nobody else was allowed to use the trumpets he had. The next leader, Yehoshua, had to have a new set of trumpets. He had to have his own trumpets. And the Midrash tells us, source 19, to Moshe, you use them yourself, but nobody else can use them. Know that even Joshua, your servant, the student of Moshe, didn't use them. And I'd like to use that idea because it's also about temple service, because obviously all about the Maccabees is re-inaugurating the temple, is that in every generation, we need to have our own silver trumpets. And today, my oldest daughter's 29 and my youngest one is 12. What was good for the one who was 29, who grew up without a mobile phone, it's a different world. I need a new set of trumpets to light her light. I need to find what floats her boat, and I have to find what is the right thing to light the spark, to keep her spirit of Judaism alive. And I have to find those right things. I have to find, as a parent, I have to find those things. And you have to find the thing that does it for you. For people who aren't parents, everyone has to find the thing that lights their spark, that you've got a strong flame, like the candles that we have to light, that the lights have to be strong flame. And we have to incorporate it. Being women, we have to be strong, we have to be courageous, and we have to be creative and innovative to think of ways where we can have our own unique set of silver trumpets. And I'm very happy for you, joking about the donuts and the whiskey and whatever else is there, the gin. But it's amazing that your community have come together, and post-COVID, I think it's been very, very challenging to convince people to come out. And maybe some of you hardly saw each other in the last 2 years. And I think it's absolutely incredible that so many of you, different ages, stages, have come out. And I hope that you've got some inspiration and you can take it away and maybe you can pass it on and inspire somebody else. And thank you so much for listening.